Hello and welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring today's most pressing global issues into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. North Korea could hold its seventh nuclear test or test launch a missile before or after the U.S. presidential election. South Korea's Defense Intelligence Agency says North Korea has finalized internal preparations for a test at its Punggye-ri nuclear testing site, mentioning Kim Jong-un's recent visit to the uranium enrichment facility. The agency added that North Korea also appears ready to launch a long-range inter-continental ballistic missile, the timing of which could be within November. Now, concerns about the potential deployment of North Korean advanced units to the front lines of the Ukraine-Russia war have also been raised, as the agency noted that mobilization efforts of these troops, particularly towards the Kursk border region, seem to be imminent. For a deeper discussion on this, we're joined in the studio by Dr. Kim Mok-yeon, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute for National Security Strategy. Welcome, Dr. Go.
My pleasure to be here.
And also joining us from New York is Mark Barry, Associate Editor Emeritus at the International Journal on World Peace. Great to have you with us, Mark.
Yes, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, so let's start with Dr. Go. The situation in Russia. South Korea's DIA says the mobilization of North Korean troops towards the battlefields, including the Kursk border, appears to be very imminent. What kind of role do you think these North Korean soldiers would play there?
So it's also, so far it's not very clear what's the role that North Korean troops are going to have at the front lines. But what is becoming more certain is that North Koreans are going to have at least some combat roles supporting the Russian military there. Because we're talking about the size of deployment from North Korea, and then we also know the unit they belong to is called the storm troops. So it's one of the best trained, well-equipped infantry units in North Korea right now. So it's obvious, I mean, it's kind of follow from there that they're going to be participating in combat against the Ukrainian forces. What's left to be seen is whether some of those units are also going to fulfill support role. At the beginning, when the rumors circulated about North Korean deployment in Ukraine, it was speculated that most North Korean soldiers wouldn't be combat troops, but rather engineers and construction units that could support Russian war effort along the front lines. So it could also be that that could be an important function for the North Korean troops going forward, which also would mean that North Korea could send more troops down the road. In addition, the 12,000 that has been estimated to be the overall scale of the North Korean deployment at the moment.
Right, so more troops could be on the way. Dr. Go, you just mentioned about the best trained soldiers. My next question is, in contrast to South Korean intelligence agencies' reports that these soldiers that have been deployed are elite, highly trained soldiers, like you've mentioned, the Wall Street Journal said these soldiers could be recently conscripted teenagers and very young soldiers with under-experience. Do we have confirmation at this point?
Well, I don't have any confirmation other than visual confirmations. So far, I mean, this also doesn't mean it's a representative proof the overall age of the North Korean soldiers who will be deployed to Ukraine in the future or present, for that matter. But then I think if you're just relying on visual clues to judge the age of the North Korean soldiers present in Ukraine in Russia right now, I think that could be potentially misleading. And the reason is because oftentimes we use the South Korean young men as a point of reference to gauge the potential age group of the North Koreans, and oftentimes we tend to underestimate their age. The reason is because obviously the nutritional situation in North Korea, which stunts the growth of young people, and also the conscription age of North Korea is below 18. So if indeed it's true that the North Korean soldiers are in their 20s, then they would have already have at least 4 to 5 years of military experience. So that's more than the military experience of a similar South Korean, similar, the peer group in South Korea, which tend to have a military experience of around 2 years maximum. So that already means that North Koreans, even though they look young, it's likely that they are older than they look. So what I think the information that was coming out of actually the South Korean government, which indicated that these soldiers are probably in their early 20s. That's still young, but at the same time, given their starting conscription age of 18, it means that they already have at least 4 to 5 years of military experience. So that would qualify most veterans. So, but at the same time, though, military experience in North Korea, which haven't seen an actual combat in the last 70 years, since the end of the Korean War in 1953. So it doesn't mean that these are, probably well trained, but doesn't mean that they are capable enough to essentially change the situation, the combat situation on the ground in Ukraine. So that remains to be seen how effective these soldiers are going to be. But on the other hand, what we can count on, to be sure about this, the North Korean soldiers are likely to be better disciplined than the raw recruits that Russians are sending to the front lines at the moment, who tend to be middle-aged and also totally not qualified for combat roles, because oftentimes the Russian military essentially recruiting soldiers from the prison populations. So in that sense, I think the North Korean soldiers could be essentially an important contribution to Russian war efforts.
Right, regardless of their age, and the average age could be younger with more experience. Now, President Yoon Suk-yeol also said that North Korean troops in Russia could be deployed in battlefield zones in Ukraine sooner than what was expected. What's the reason behind North Korea's hastened entry?
So there could be several factors explaining the possible early deployment, or relatively early deployment of North Korean troops. So one factor could be that the fact that the South Korean government and the Ukrainian governments are very proactive in disclosing the fact that North Korea has deployed soldiers for Russia in Ukraine. I think that probably has eliminated an element of surprise. Perhaps Kim Jong-un and Putin plan to surprise the Ukrainians and the Western powers by showcasing North Koreans overnight, essentially without really giving indications that they are already there in Ukraine. So if Putin and Kim Jong-un, they want to recoup the element of surprise, then even though it's already lost, they will need to redeploy as many North Korean soldiers as possible and also early as possible. So that could be one factor. So, and there's also another factor independent of this issue, which is the demand for North Korean troops in Ukraine on behalf of the Russian military. It could be that the Russians are planning to essentially mount an offensive before the election in the United States. So there's a widely held expectation that if Donald Trump is elected and returns to the White House, then he could press both sides, Russia and Ukraine, for the immediate ceasefire and the end to the war. So if the Russians are planning to freeze the conflict along the battle lines right now that we observe today, it is possible that the Russians they need more troops, manpower at the moment, and that means that they will need as many soldiers from North Korea as possible and as early as possible. So that could mean that the early deployment, that could explain the early deployment of North Korean units that President Yoon has talked about.
Right. Thank you for the explanation, Dr. Go. Now, let's bring in Mr. Barry to the conversation. Kim Yong-bok, a close aide to North Korea's Kim Jong-un, was also reportedly dispatched to Russia, and Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee has also arrived in Russia. What do the visits of these top North Korean officials signal, and what is the purpose of their visit to Russia?
General Kim, according to Michael Madden, who wrote on 38 North last night, is likely supervising the Korean People's Army's Special Operation Forces transition into the Ukraine theater and consolidating command and control over all Korean People's Army assets, including munitions, technicians, et cetera, in the Ukraine theater. And he's also probably coordinating with Russian counterparts and creating a reporting framework between deployed personnel in Pyongyang. So that's a very close paraphrase of what he says. Foreign Minister Cho, in my view, is likely coordinating what Pyongyang will receive in return and create a detailed agreement as to how and when the DPRK will be compensated. But I doubt if she's in a position to discuss the deployment of additional troops, because that's really out of her purview. That's more for the military and the defense ministry. Nonetheless, one German institute in collaboration with I believe Hankook University published a study, I think on Monday, estimating that this deal between North Korea and Russia is worth $5.5 billion.
Right. Then you mentioned receive and return, and there were figures right now. Mr. Barry, what could North Korea then get in return from Russia?
Well, I took the view in a interview I had on Busan Radio on Monday that basically because of the failure of the Hanoi summit and Kim Jong-un giving up not just on the Trump administration and the Biden administration, but on the United States as an organic entity, it now has no choice in terms of offsetting enormous pressure from China and particularly from President Xi Jinping, but to throw its lot in with Russia. So basically, I termed the relationship between North Korea and Russia as a subcontractor relationship. So basically, I don't see Kim Jong-un having a lot of wiggle room. And those who speculate that he may get important high-tech military technology, I doubt it very much. He'll have lots of old Soviet scientists who'll show him how to use a screwdriver, so to speak. They'll get a lot less than they're hoping for. What they will get is some fuel. They'll get some food stuff. They'll get some crypto cash that's been earned illegally. But I don't think they're going to get that much. But it makes for good headlines. But I think this is a raw deal for Kim Jong-un in the long run. Right.
So a mild economic assistance from Russia.
Yeah, I think that's what it really is. Yeah.
Then, Dr. Go, what about military cooperation? What more cooperation can we expect between North Korea and Russia, especially after the deployment of the first batch of soldiers?
Well, it really depends on what kind of arrangements that the North Koreans and the Russian militaries are going to come up with. So there are contradicting reports in this regard. So there's some indication earlier that North Korea would only deploy their soldiers on the condition that they will be granted an independent command, independent of the Russian command. So this is oftentimes an arrangement that sovereign countries demand from a country that's essentially hosting foreign troops. And the reason is because you don't want to put your military, your soldiers under the command of another country. But it looks like that's not the case in this case. So it looks like the North Korean units will be under the command of Russian officers. And so I think this is the reason why there are reports that there's a demand for translators, interpreters, to be embedded with these North Korean units. There are reports that essentially there will be at least one interpreter for every 30 North Korean soldiers. So in that sense, I think it looks like the North Korean soldier will be serving under the Russian command. So this actually has a lot of implications. The first is that there could be it's also possible that the Ukrainians, if they capture North Korean soldiers, wouldn't grant them protection under the Geneva Convention. And the reason is because these are not regular soldiers, but essentially mercenaries working for the Russian military. So there's a room for such interpretation. It's really up to the Ukrainian authority to do so. So this makes essentially the North Korean deployment politically, in a normal country, would be politically a hot potato. But then this is North Korea, so maybe North Koreans are not demanding the Russians any compensation, despite the fact that the North Koreans have given the Russian side an important point, considered this important point, that they would allow their soldiers to serve under the Russians. So this is, but at the same time, the presence of General Kim Mok-yeon, who's the important military aid to Kim Jong-un, as Mr. Berry has indicated, he might be in Russia to coordinate not just the coordination between the Russian and the North Korean authorities, but also perhaps to essentially set up a command structure for the North Korean troops. So that would mean then the North Korean soldiers will be more properly acting as a soldier of a different country participating in a warfare in Ukraine. So this has all the legal implications, and perhaps the North Koreans are taking that into consideration. So we have to see how finally North Koreans will be essentially behaving or like acting on the battlegrounds of Ukraine. So it should remain to be seen.
Right, and that will decide whether more troops could be deployed.
So that's also possible. Yeah.
Now, Mr. Berry, in light of North Korea's troop deployment and the tightening ties between North Korea and Russia, what kind of diplomatic strategy would you recommend for the South Korean government?
Cool heads. What North Korea wants is for South Korea to overreact. Plays right into their hands. The only condition is that I think because of the subcontractor relationship, that Putin is allowing only a certain level of mischief for North Korea. So they have to probably contain some of their mischief and reactions to the South. But as far as the South is concerned, every overreaction and anything that displays any lack of coordination with South Korea's allies will only accrue to the benefit of North Korea and Russia. So I think that this is a time for to be very, very calm and conservative, despite the situation that might cause one to act otherwise, because this is something that only can be done through the strength of allies and the coordination between allies.
Right, so we should remain cool and calm as possible. Then President Yoon Suk-yeol referred to the latest developments as a grave situation and stressed a united response with the international community. And on Thursday, foreign defense chiefs of Seoul and Washington are set to hold their sixth 2+2 talks. Mr. Berry, what can we expect from the meeting?
Well, I think this is extremely fortuitous. You have, in a matter of hours, in fact, I think the press conference will be shortly after noon today. You have the annual security consultative meeting, which alternates between the two capitals, and the South Korean defense minister and Secretary of Defense Austin will meet. And I think they'll get a lot of eye-to-eye agreement and an understanding that the United States feels it's in a position to coordinate, along with its NATO allies, the assistance to Ukraine. And South Korea has to fit into that and not get ahead of its skis. And then I believe every 3 years is the 2+2 meeting that you referred to, which will include Foreign Minister Cho and Secretary Blinken that you see on the screen. And again, I think the U.S. will ask the RK to be in lockstep with it, to act in concert, and especially because we have an election coming up in the U.S. and then a post-election period, not only in the U.S. but also in Japan, where they're trying to cobble together a government. I should also add that the elephant in the room is that we could expect that the period between November 6th and January 6th may be even more tumultuous than in 2020 and more uncertain than it was in 2000. And I think part of the reason is that absent a landslide for either candidate, one of them, a former president, will claim that he is the acting president, and that he will go about that 8-week period to prove it to the American public. So you're going to have a lot of uncertainty, and so you don't want Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, et cetera, to take advantage of that uncertainty. And we don't know if American democracy will work this out well. This is a very, very dangerous period, and I can say that as a guy who lives 100 miles north of Madison Square Garden, where we saw a political rally unlike we had never heard before. But there's something in the air, and it's very, very dangerous in my view. There's a lot of naivete on the part of much of the American political establishment in both sides. This is going to have huge ramifications for South Korea and Japan.
Right, so a very concerning situation indeed, and up until the U.S. presidential elections just around the corner. Now, Dr. Go, moving from this topic, South Korea's intelligence agency says North Korea has been beefing up security for its leader, Kim Jong-un, due to fears of possible assassination attempt. Can you elaborate on why and why is this leader tightening security at this time? Were there any kind of signs or signals?
Well, I think that's the fact that he's beefing up personal security in a one-man dictatorship that's tight control of everything is the best sign that he feels very threatened. But at the same time, whether there's an actual threat against him or his family is a different question. So there are always going to be some sort of threats against his life in a dictatorship, because clearly, the entire totalitarian apparatus of the regime depends on one single person, and that happens to be Kim Jong-un himself. So, yeah, threat to his life has a disproportionate impact on the overall stability of the regime compared to more stable political systems, let alone a democratic system. So, and then it's also clear that Kim Jong-un hasn't made it clear yet what kind of line of succession he's going to have in the future, even though his daughter, Kim Joo-ae, is he appears in public more often and seems to have a high stature. But nonetheless, a lot is at stake on his life. So I think more he goes along and the more he represses the society, he feels that the potential for threatening his life is actually going up. So it's very clear the threat perception, the perception that his life is a danger is going up. And I think it's about time, because North Korea has been subject to, the entire country has been subject to very stringent repressive measures ever since the COVID started spread into the country in the 2020s. And then I think that the aftermath of it, with the very restrictive laws that controlled the information flow going after people who consume South Korean media, and also the total hermetic closing down of the border, and it's keeping the people inside the country and the discontent inside the society without any escape valve. So I think this is increasing the risk for attempts against life at the moment.
Now, Dr. Go, before we let you go, can we just ask one more question about our introduction? North Korea has completed preparations for a long-range missile test. What's your thoughts on this?
So I think they are ready for a test. It's a demonstrative test. They want to send a message to whoever wins the elections next week in the United States. And then also means they are essentially setting the stage for a potential dialogue with the United States. It's going to be a negotiation, not about stabilization of the peninsula, but about the one single item in the agenda, which is asking the United States to acknowledge North Korea as a nuclear state. So I think Kim Jong-un feels that he essentially has all the requisite pieces in the puzzle to be the head of a nuclear state. And finally, the final achievement for him would be for the sitting U.S. president to acknowledge North Korea as a nuclear state.
All right, so he wants to make his presence shown in this situation. I'm afraid we will have to wrap up our discussion at this point. We're running out of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Go and Mr. Berry, for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.